I'm Sebastian St. James. Australia is famous for high dividend-paying stocks, and by comparison, the US sucks. The question is there actually a dividend-paying fund in the US, an ETF that actually outstrips Australia? That would be a very interesting question. It is the US versus Australia. It is Mike Preston versus Jim Kay. Whoa. Goodness me. This is what Jim had to say. As a relative newbie, it's slightly disconcerting that the top 10 dividend stocks would seemingly have so many potential issues. Could investing in a dividend-focused ETF like VHY be considered as an alternative? Even some of the general ASX tracking ETFs appear to pay reasonable dividends. Interested in your thoughts? Thanks. So we have Mike Preston versus VHY, which is an Australian ETF, which is all about dividends. Our second contestant is Mike Preston, no-go. I see a number 3 there. He's clearly been a member of my channel for 3 months. Interesting, let me look that up. Oh yes, here he is. He's a part of the early access to videos level, which means he gets his videos before everybody else does. And if you'd like to be like Mike and get early access to my videos and a few extra perks, hit the join button below. Mike says, "All right, Sebastian." Apparently my name has a bit of an accent now. Why not? I'm prepared to be foreign if you are. SCHD, Wisdom Tree, not the lows even though not the growth over 5 years. And Dow Jones, Platinum is underrated. However, not a good idea for an ETF. Even I know that. I know the Dow doesn't even compare to ATA with growth. But I guess not the low lows have been taken into consideration. So what does that mean? He's talking about SCHD, which is Schwab US Dividend Equity ETF. Aha! He's also mentioned something about Wisdom Tree, which has a lot of ETFs, although he didn't mention any specific one about them. And he talked about platinum, which is a precious metal, and how he realized although platinum might be going up, even he realizes it's not necessarily a good investment. So we have our ETFs. Here it is. It is SCHD, which is a US ETF, versus the VHY, which is Australia. Australia versus the US. This is exciting. It's like the America's Cup all over again. Who will win? I'm quivering as we speak, but that might just be the Parkinson's. I should get that checked out. The question is, does even comparing these two ETFs make sense? Yes, they are both dividend-paying ETFs. I mean, that's what the purpose is. So in that place, it makes sense. They are coming from different ends of the world. There's no reason why I can't compare that. But when did these ETFs even start? Well, let's have a look. Vanguard Australian Shares High Yield ETF. Yield in this case means paying out dividends. So what's the difference between a dividend and a distribution? Distribution comes from funds. Dividends come from actual stocks. At the end of the day, they're more or less the same. But if you want to know specifically what is a distribution and what is a dividend, I guess you could largely say a dividend is a subgroup of a distribution. The second one is Schwab, US Dividend Equity ETF. Their inception dates, this is the key. VHY started on the 23rd of May, 2011. SCHD started on the 20th of October 2011. Wow, they are the same year. Yes, only a few bare months apart. Wow. Did it take me several hours to go through all the viewers' questions which they've asked me over the last year, find actually 2 that started in exactly the same year, one being Australian, one being the US? Yes, it did, and even I'm impressed. So let's take a look. SCHD has an expense ratio of 0.06%, perfectly reasonable for an ETF. Vanguard, on the other hand, has a management fee of 0.25%. That is not 0.025, that is 0.25. Vanguard seems to get a free pass. Talk ETFs, people talk about Vanguard. It is wonderful. What they don't realise is half the time, at least in Australia, they overcharge. And I'm going to point a finger at that. VHY is domiciled in Australia. Totally makes sense. It is an ETF about Australian stocks. SCHD is actually domiciled in the US. Again, it makes sense because it's actually all about the US. The exchange they're traded on, this is very important. VHY is traded on the ASX. SCHD is not available on the ASX. It's actually available in the US, the New York Stock Exchange to be exact. You cannot buy it in Australia. Well, you can, but you buy it as a foreign stock. It is not an Australian ETF. About this fund, this is VHY. Vanguard Australian High Yield ETF seeks to track the return of the FTSE Australian High Dividend Yield Index. All right, that's what they're tracking. SCHD. The fund's goal is to track as closely as possible before fees and expenses the total return of the Dow Jones US Dividend 100 Index. All right, that's what they're tracking. The question is, what do they hold? Do they even hold similar types of stocks? Well, not necessarily. They need to, because after all, it's just about dividends. It's nothing else. But tends to be financials pay good dividends, energy companies, telcos, things that have reoccurring revenue, not always a lot of new expenses to put their money towards. They tend to pay higher dividends. Let's see. So the top holdings of the SCHD, that's the US fund, Verizon Communications, which is a telco, Broadcom, Merck & Co, Home Depot, home improvements, Pfizer, as in drug maker, Coca-Cola, drinks, Cisco, routers, PepsiCo, as in Pepsi Max, Lockheed Martin, as in the weapons industry, and Texas Instruments, as in scientific instruments. In Australia, VHY, we have BHP, which is the big miner, Commonwealth and National Australia Bank, Woodside Energy is clearly about oil. Westpac, all right, third bank. Oh, all the banks are there. There we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, all in a row. Wesfarmers, diversified retailers, and big in insurance as well. Telstra, telecommunications, Macquarie Bank, which is our fifth bank, and Transurban. Well, of course, they ticket you on toll roads. Their holdings were quite different, weren't they? Pepsi, Coke. Nothing was like that in the Australian one. Mining in the Australian one. No mining stocks over in the US. Let's have a graph-off. Over the 1 year, red is in front, and red finishes off in front. Who's red? Well, red is VHY. That is Australia. Over the 1 year, Australia wins. Yay! Over the 2 years, it is blue in front. Oh, the bit of a drop there, and blue remains in front. Who is blue? Of course, it's the American fund. Over the 3 years, wow, big dip all of a sudden. Then it is blue in front, and blue wins. Yeah, okay, SCHD again. Over the 5 years, it is confusing. Massive drop. Notice the date there. Just after 2020, which is a you-know-what hit. I can't actually say the word because YouTube likes to put little warnings down the bottom. Warning, if you're talking about this particular topic, then click on this link to actually find out the truth, as if I wouldn't tell you the truth. So I tend to skip certain words, but you know what I'm talking about. And then blue in front and blue in front. Yeah, blue wins, basically. America wins on the 5 year, the 3 year, and the 2 year. Wow, it's just constantly winning. Over the 10 years, blue is in front, blue wins. America again. Wow. Over the complete lifetime, 11.2 years. Here it is. They start off together. Well, that's a good sign. Blue is in front, and blue is in front again. Wow, there we go. That's your answer. America wins. The question is, by how much? That I can answer for you. So we notice January 4, 2023. In other words, this is right up to date. Over the entire lifetime, SCHD, the American ETF, returned 199%. Wow. On the same date, VHY, which is the Australian Dividend ETF, returned only 39%. There's a massive difference there. They're just not even in the same ballpark. Now, keep in mind, in the graph is the retained value of the funds, not the distributions. That's important. However, if one returns 199, the other ETF returns 39%, what, does a couple percent in distributions matter? But let's take a look at the yield. The Australian version, VHY, returns 5.5% yield. You can think of that as your dividend. It's actually distribution. The US version, SCHD, is 3.14%. Right. So Australia beats the America on the actual yield. But if we take the total returns, we take everything into account. VHY returns 39% plus a 5.5% yield. SCHD returns 199% plus a 3.14% yield. Yeah, so there's no real comparison. Now, that yield is per year, and the percentage return was over the entire lifetime, so don't just add those figures up. But you can start to see if the actual return is so massively different, does that few percent matter? Well, that's a question you're going to have to think about for yourself. Now, to add them up properly is to look at the total returns. In other words, what is the share price and what is the distribution? Add them together. Over the 1 year with SCHD, we notice it's returned 7.51%. In the 1 year, VHY has returned 16.72%, so Australia wins in year number 1. Over 3 years, America returns 15.26%, Australia returns 9.23%. Right, so we're behind already at the 3 year. At the 5 year, the US returns 20.91%, Australia returns 8.16. Over the 10-year, the US returns 14.12%, Australia returns 8.97%. You're well behind, aren't you? And since its inception, which is, 11 and a bit years, 14.28% total returns. This is dividend plus share performance for the US version, the Australian version over the same period of time. But remember, there's about 6 months difference, so basically the same period of time, 9.09%. There it is in black and white. Whoa, so much information. Now, what are my conclusions? Well, based on the history, SCHD US outperforms VHY Australia. VHY returned a higher distribution than SCHD, we saw that. High dividends or distributions are good, but be careful that your capital isn't being eroded. A lot of dividend investors get this wrong. They see 5, 6, 7% return on your distributions, and then you look at the share price, oh no, it's lost 80%. Oh yes, but I've still got 8% dividend. Ha! Yes, add the two together. Look at the total return always. So we know how Australia versus the US goes as far as high dividend yield ETF goes. The question is, how would these specific ETFs that are designed to target dividends compare to a bog standard index fund? That I will tell you in a minute, but firstly, I have to admit to a mistake I've made. It was horrible. It was on full display for everybody to see. On a previous video, their video was actually, will 2023 be a bad year for the stock market? Also, it could be written, will 2023 be a bad year for Sebastian's studio lights? Dan Spear gave me a $5 thanks. He says, a little something to help you keep the lights on at home, at least the ones behind you. That's those lights there. In my last video, I forgot to turn on the particular backlights. Unfortunately, once you do that, it actually changes all the white balance and then this light gets blown out. It was terrible, but once you've recorded it, it actually is baked in. There's like basically nothing you can do about it. Fortunately, Dan came to the rescue, you see. I've got studio lights on this time because of Dan. And if you'd like to help me keep those backlights on in the studio, then hit the thanks button below. If we're going to compare bog standard index funds against these specialised high yield funds, we need to know what the yield is going into these. Well, here it is. VHY, which is what we looked at before, was 5.5% return. That's the highest returning of the four funds. VAS, which is the ASX 300 Bog Standard Index Fund Australian, returns 4.3%. SCHD returns 3.14%. Notice there that the Bog Standard Index Fund in Australia returns higher than the American Specific High Dividend Yield Fund. Interesting. And IVV returns a paltry 1.42%. You can see why they think that 3.14% is amazing. Yes, it is in comparison to index fund. In comparison to Australian index funds, no, not so much. Isn't Australia amazing? Even our index funds are dividend funds automatically. It's time for a graph off. Here we're going to compare the two dividend-specific ETFs against the same index fund in their countries. Who will win? Over the 1 year, we notice, they're bunched up. Green is in front, and green remains in front. Who's green? Well, green is VHY. That's the Australian Dividend ETF. Well done. Over the 2 years, we find they're bunched up. No, red is in front. No, blue is in front. Well, blue is in... I can't tell. It's a mess. It's a mess. And hang on, let me zoom in. And it is... it's red. Who's red? Red is... SCHD. That is the US Dividend Fund. Over the 3 years, blue is in front. No, red is in front. They're bunched up again. Oh no. Red remains in front. I'm not sure. Red remains in front. There you go. It was clear as mud, but red did win. And of course, that is the American Dividend Fund. Over the 5 years, blue is in front, blue is in front, blue touches red, but then blue is in front and then blue wins. Who is blue? IVV. This is the S&P 500 ETF. Not a specific dividend fund, but it wins over the 5 years. Wow. Over the 10 years, a very long period of time, blue is in front, and blue remains in front. Well, that's nice and clear. IVV, the S&P 500. Now, this is IVV, the Australian version of it. Now, it's about the US, so in a way, there's no Australian version of it, but it is domiciled in Australia. There is an IVV in the US, but that's not the one we're talking about here. Over the full lifetime, here we go. Blue is in front, blue is in front, blue is in front. Blue wins. So there we go. That is your pecking order. You can see it right there. I'm about to summarize it in a table for you. So the returns, the very best was IVV, the Australian version of it, 401% over an entire lifetime. That's nice. Yes. Secondly, it is SCHD. That is the American Specific Dividend Fund, which came out as a 210%, which is about half, isn't it? VAS is the Australian ASX 300, which returned 69%. Not as good, but it is better than VHY, which returned 44%. VHY is the Australian Specific Dividend Fund. So what are our conclusions? In both cases, the index fund outperformed the same country's dividend fund. So it would appear, based on these results, that if you go for a dividend-specific fund, you may get higher dividends, but your overall performance will suffer. Well, based on this data anyway. Secondly, the Australian Index Fund at 4.3%, that's VAS, the bog standard index fund, has a higher dividend than the US specific high yield fund, which only returned 3.14%. So if you invest in the Australian market, you're already doing better than the Americans with their high dividend yield funds. The question is, should you buy an ETF that's specific to dividends, a high dividend yield fund? Now, don't get hoodwinked by the name. As you can see, certain index funds are very high as well. And should you be investing in Australia, which definitely has the higher yield, or should you be investing in the US, which is the higher total return? That appears to me to be a you question. An alternative to investing in an ETF, where somebody else is making all the decisions for you, you can actually buy high-yield stocks yourself. It's certainly an option, in which case this video will tell you all about that, or if you've seen that, click here.